Members, we are at 5:30, so I'm going to bring you to order, please. Thank you very much indeed. Before we start, I want to specifically welcome the new members, Councillor Hughes, Councillor Banyard, Councillor Ralston, Councillor Hussain, and Councillor Atkinson, obviously very experienced in many committees, but that's the first time being on one with me. Welcome to you all. The first item on our agenda is apologies. I've received one from Councillor Ketchin. I see that Councillor Miller isn't here yet. Once we actually get involved in the discussions, unfortunately she'll not be able to vote, but let's hope we're just doing the preliminaries before she does turn up. Okay, so the only apologies I have received from Councillor Ketchin. Now to draw attention to agenda item number 2, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. Of that, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 6 of us present who were at that meeting, so I have read through them and I think that they represent a true record of the meeting, but I would welcome any comments or alterations or things. I know we're all happy, so if those present would care to indicate that they accept those into the record, thank you very much indeed. I will sign those minutes later. Right. Item number 3, as we always do, I remind you of the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest that relate to businesses on the agenda and which have not already been included in the register of interest before any discussion takes place on the meeting. Okay, does anybody have a declaration to make? I see no, so that's fine. We shall now move on to agenda item 4, which is the exclusion of press and public. I see absolutely no reason for anything here to exclude the press and public, although I do have absence this evening, but we are being filmed still for posterity, so I will remind you, as always, be reasonable in your behaviour and language. We're then on to item number 5. So we're on our planning application. I hope you all had a chance to read through the application, but I do invite the Professor to make the report.
Thank you, Chair. So the application before us this evening is a slightly unusual one. It's not typical kind of application the planning committee would expect to be determining. There are a couple of reasons for that. The first reason is that it's a domestic alteration, so a change to a house by adding some solar panels. Normally, adding solar panels to a house is permitted development. You don't need to make a planning application for that, so it's not typically, we wouldn't see an application for that on a house, except that on this particular estate, the permitted development rights have been removed. Permitted development rights are the rights to do minor alterations to your house without making a planning application. So they can include things like solar panels, but also satellite dishes, small extensions, sheds in your garden. So you don't typically need to make an application to do those. But in this case, those rights have been removed. And so if you live in one of these houses and you need to make any alteration to your house, you have to make a formal application to the council. It's perhaps worth saying that I think the reason why the permitted development rights were removed on this estate was because they have quite small gardens, and it was to make sure there was a reasonable amount of outdoor amenity space retained, that we had control over that. So the fact that they've had to make an application for solar panels is kind of an unintended consequence of removing the rights. And on a more modern, recent planning application, we might be more careful about our wording of removing those development rights so that this doesn't happen in the future. Because we don't really want to be preventing people putting solar panels on their roofs. The second reason why this is before you is that even in the case where we do deal with planning applications for solar panels, they don't normally come to planning committee. But in this case, the applicant's husband is a member of staff at City Council. So in accordance with our constitution, we are obliged to report it to planning committee for a transparent decision. It's a relatively straightforward application. A mid-terrace property in Admiral Way, There you go, see it there. It's in a crescent shape of houses. It's the second in from the right in that picture. So it's this house here where the red dot is. That's it from the rear. So it's this where the red dot is, where these two windows sticking out the roof are. This is the roof where most of the solar panels are going. But it's also supposed to have some on the associated garage with the property as well. So you can see in the plan here, there are solar panels on the roof, and there are solar panels on the garage roof as well. So that's what we would be approving. You would be approving if the application is approved in accordance with the recommendations tonight. So another plan showing the positioning of the solar panels in the context of the house and the garage. And this is how they would profile of how the panels will be affixed to the roof, which is a typical way of doing it. There are some photos here of examples of other solar panels on houses in the vicinity, so this is already part of the character of the area. See, these are properties that are not far away from the application site where there are already solar panels. So that's it in a nutshell. Recommendation for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I ask if there are any questions for the officer related to the presentation?
No questions. I'm just going to recommend we move to approval. Seems a very good case to me to approve.
Thank you. So I have a proposal. We move, as our councillor mentioned. Would you like to ask a question? Yes, please ask the question first. Then we will. First question.
Somebody else?
Not me.
By accepting the recommendation to approve this, what impact does that have on the development rights of other houses nearby affected by the original agreement? Does that mean in future they will have to apply, or will they automatically get their rights taken away, reinstated, or do we have to do, or does the planning team have to deal with every single one that comes in the future?
I'm afraid it applies to this particular house, not to the rest of the estate. So every time somebody wants to make an alteration to their property, where the rights have been taken away by a condition on the original approval for the estate, they would have to make a separate planning application to us, which is why we want to make sure that this doesn't happen too often in the future. So if we remove permitted development rights in the future, we need to be very specific about what rights we're removing, so we don't have the unintended consequence of preventing people from putting solar panels up.
Before I take the motion to move to a vote, are there any other questions for the officer related to this report? I have a motion before me that we move straight to the vote. It's been seconded. So first of all, I would like a show of hands to see whether or not you agreed was going to a vote. Okay, so. Thank you very much. If we are going to move to a vote, I now ask if you read the application. There are a series of recommendations. Can you go to the slide for the recommendations, please? Okay, so the recommendation is that we grant permission with conditions. The conditions are, again, straightforward and I think perfectly acceptable. So I'm now asking for a show of hands in favour of the recommendation to grant permission subject to those conditions.
So was it proposed and seconded the motion?
Right, okay, so I'm proposing.
I'll
happily
second that.
Yes, thank you very much. No, we do need to stick, particularly for our new members,
Yes.
we need to stick to our protocols. Thank you very much indeed, Councillor. So that's been proposed, it's been seconded, and now I'm calling for a vote. Thank you. And that is unanimous. Thank you all very much indeed. We shall now move on our agenda. Page. Right, we now have agenda item number 6, which is a list of decisions made and withdrawn applications. You were provided with that list before this meeting. Does anybody wish to make any comments on the list of decisions made and withdrawn applications. Councillor Bolt.
Yeah, I just had a question about 240263
Can you tell us?
GIS, that's the Celia Drive application. What a page number?
Yes, please.
Page 24.
24.
I think it's Cedar Crescent, 50 Cedar Crescent.
Celia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's one, there's a Cedar Crescent one.
Oh, it's the one with the link.
Oh, okay, can I?
Sorry, it's page 20. Oh, well, hang on, 26. Well, hang on a minute, I've got 2 page numbers. One is the PDF.
There's one on page 26.
26.
Celia Crescent. That one?
Yeah.
The
so
trees.
Yeah, I just was wondering, you know, I probably could go and research it myself. I just wondered what was the nature of the link. Or is that something that can easily be answered? Not offhand.
No, off the top of my head, I don't know the answer. Sorry, but I can investigate and contact tomorrow.
Okay, yeah, sorry, yeah, that's just, that was it. Thank you very much, that's totally fine.
Okay, papers, we now come on to item number 7, which is the appeals report. Again, you've had that list in front of you. You have a chance to make comments now. Would you like to make any comments before we start?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think the only appeal decision that I would draw the committee's attention to is the one related to 6872 Howell Road. And so I don't know what page number that is.
Page 53.
This is a significant decision. So the application was refused by the planning committee, and then when it went to appeal, the appeal was upheld. So in other words, planning permission was granted. And in issuing that decision, the planning inspector made reference to, I think, 3 quite significant issues that need to be thought of really in terms of future policy and how we address the issues in relation to the new Exeter plan that we're bringing forward. So those issues, without going into all the detail, in relation to how we define matters that relate in the policy wording to over-concentration, area of the city and imbalance in the local community. So what the inspector's saying is that whilst policy H5 is applicable, that those factors are not defined in the policy. And then he goes on to talk about notwithstanding that there was no evidence presented or insufficient evidence presented at the appeal to sort of justify those concerns. So I think without me commenting specifically, I think it's an interesting decision, something that I think I've asked the team, the policy team, to go away and look at, so we can understand it in relation to how we describe future policy. But clearly also it's of interest to the planning committee, and I would just welcome any thoughts or comments on that decision, and we'll take those into consideration when we're looking at this as officers as we go forward. There may also be, I think, an opportunity, not necessarily with this particular case, but generally to look at how decisions are handled at appeal in relation to a future training event. So we did this last year for the planning committee, where we had a specific training event on the appeals process. So I'm not suggesting that we use this particular example, but we will certainly be wanting to do some more training for you generally on the appeals process. We may well come up with a sort of fictitious case just to make it sort of non-sensitive, if that makes sense.
Councillor Lynch.
For the police station site. Thank you, Chair, to writing asked to speak on this matter. And I thank the Director for outlining roughly what I was going to say, but I'll put it in layman's language if I can to try to. First, I'd like to thank the case office for all the work they did undertaking this task, because it was an examination by written evidence. It wasn't an open field way, which I just had to put the documentation in, and the timescales are not often great on this matter. Speaking on behalf of the community in this way, I think they're generally bewildered by this, because for so many years they've relied on the local plan and the neighbourhood plan to enhance their feeling that we were somehow protecting community balance, which is particularly crucial in Dewar St James and other neighbouring wards with a concentration of student occupation and single person living to maintain a community balance, which is what it's about. What bemused me within this inspector's report, which strictly in a very literal sense is correct, he's talking about planning relates to the buildings, not to the people in them, and therefore when we talk about community balance and that, it almost appears we're talking about the type and number of those buildings in a particular area, rather than the use made of those buildings and what impact that use might have on the community, which is, as a layman, that is the interpretation I put on it. So I'm somewhat amused at this extremely literal interpretation. And also, I think we need to bear in mind, the local plan is now, what, 13, 14 years old. Nothing wrong with that. The neighbourhood plan, 10 or 12 years old. They were both open to public examination. They weren't just invented and kicked off. They've gone through an entire process. And it is concerning this length of time that we're getting issues like this arising on, I think, quite fundamental planning issues that we're concerned about as a community. Also, I'm somewhat surprised that the inspector didn't aware of Article 4 regulations, which quite clearly use the emphasis of community balance and talk of the 20% figure as the figure we use in relation to that, and why that doesn't correspond in another planning context, I'm unsure, because clearly the inspector wasn't aware of that. As I say, I am concerned that this problem does not reoccur in the new local plan. The new local plan does not refer to community balance. It only refers to mixed communities. I've got an idea what a community balance is. I'm a little bit unsure what a mixed community is. If I can fruit that or something at Tesco's. So I think when we get to examine that in relation particularly to this appeal, we as members, if we wish to reassert the concept of community balance, need to strengthen our wording, look at the criteria we use in relation to Article 4, we do use postal codes and geographical definitions, so that if this is the members' wishes and the council and the public's wish to maintain community balance, it is rock solid, so it cannot be dismissed, I think, in the way of this particular case. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I had Councillor Hughes first, then we Councillor Hampson, then Councillor Thompson. Councillor Hughes.
I would just like to comment similarly to Councillor Mitchell. Thank you for being so eloquent in explaining the views of residents of Dewar St James. As the Councillor for Pennsylvania neighbouring ward, residents are also raising concerns that if this can happen in Dewar St James, then this is going to happen in Pennsylvania. So, and there are some excellent residents who've done scrutiny of all the paperwork that is available, and questions have been raised about the semantics. So the language that has been used, the way the inspector's report is written, it almost appears to support the planning committee's refusal, but then upholds the appeal. The way that it is written, that is how some residents have interpreted the report, those that have read it. So I just wanted to make a point about the language, the accessibility of that language, and semantics being incredibly important, sociolinguistics, that sort of thing. I don't know if that's helpful, but it has been raised by residents of Pennsylvania and Dewar St James, so we're here to represent those residents. So.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Councillor Atkinson.
Yeah, on the learning, and the last point that was made was that we took a different approach elsewhere. Have you got anything to say about that? Like, that was clearly, I think, relevant to the decision to refuse the appeal, or inconsistent in our application of presumably the neighbourhood plan. I'm not sure. A different approach was taken on another site. It says 6 here. reference was made to the recent approval of PBSA at Beaufort House.
He applied for costs in that case, using that as an
Oh,
example
so
of
it was just
inconsistent
about the
decision.
cost.
And the inspector said this was not inconsistent because the local plan and the neighbourhood plan supported student development of that area because of the extent of existing student
But
accommodation.
can I ask the officer then? Councillor Mitchell has tried to say
Sorry.
that point only relates to the question of costs, and not to the question of the reasons for the decision made. Or is that what you've written? Sorry. Paragraph 6.
Okay, so do you want to answer that, Chair?
Yeah.
So I think that what's really important to understand in all appeal decisions is there's the inspector's decision on the actual planning applications, and then there's also on occasion the appellant can make an application separately for costs if, irrespective of the actual decision, behaviour of the council, for whatever reason, has been unreasonable. So in this case there was an application for costs, and there were 6 reasons cited by the appellant for unreasonable behaviour, and they're listed and summarised for you in my report.
Thank you.
On item 6, I mean, on all items, the inspector judged that council didn't behave unreasonably, so the cost application was refused. On that particular one, which is referred to as a different approach was taken on another site, Beaufort House. I'm just reading it as I'm speaking now. So what he's basically said there, the inspector, is that it wasn't sufficiently similar, so the circumstances were different, so it wasn't unreasonable that the committee came to a different view, because it wasn't the same kind of application, is basically what he's saying. Does that
Yeah,
help?
thank you, yeah.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Johnson, please.
Thank you. I think there are a number of things, having lived and even breathed the St James Neighbourhood Plan for a number of years, that come to mind. Firstly, when that plan was approved by referendum back in 2013, by I think it was 95.6% or something or other of the population within the relevant area. The balance of the community was about 48% students to 62% non-students. I think it's now almost exactly reversed. It's certainly over 60% students. And over the years, that plan has proved time and again that because there is no percentage given as to what is meant by community balance, that it has not withstood challenge, if I can put it that way. So I think firstly, can't do much about the Exeter St James Neighbourhood Plan unless the St James neighbourhood wanted to redo and update the plan, which of course they could do. But in our local plan, it would be possible to look at a much more precise definition of what is meant by balance. I know there are some local plans, neighbourhood plans, where they actually put percentages in. That may or may not be appropriate for a bigger local plan. And of course, that balance, had it said no more than 50% or whatever, would only have been valid within the St James Neighbourhood Plan area. So with respect, it wouldn't have covered Pennsylvania and never has covered Pennsylvania. And it may well be, because I'm as aware as anyone, that there are a lot of other areas who have similar complaints as to whether or not there should be something specific in the neighbourhood plan that does protect the balance of community and local residents. So that is one of them. The other thing that has always come up in the neighbourhood plan is the PBSA being permitted in sites where it can be properly integrated into the urban area, and that has also caused problems in a number of previous applications. Roger will have lived, eaten and breathed it as well, and he'll know precisely. We had a very similar problem when we tried to judicially review the building built on the old site next to the football stadium. And that got slung out at the first stage of judicial review, which never went to an oral hearing. And again, it's community balance and obviously the PBSA could be built in areas, blah, blah. So I think if it is an opportunity with the new local plan being considered to think as to whether or not, particularly in areas where there is a propensity of non-local residents, if I can put it that way, and whether or not there should be either percentages given or a clear definition of balance. That will no doubt be open to interpretation, but at the moment we have such a vague definition of what balance is. And certainly as far as St James is concerned, it is well beyond what anyone was talking about back in 2011, 2012, when they were designing the plan. I don't know whether that helps or not, but I do think we need to look at it in two ways.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Do any other councillors have contributions? So first of all, Councillor Bainey, I think Councillor Ross.
Is there any other? Oh, sorry. Two-part question. Is there any evidence this is a smart move by a very clever lawyer to look at the wording of the local plan? And does this, the second part, does this make it more likely that other challenges would be made on the basis of a poor definition of balance?
Yeah, I think so. I think certainly as the policy is currently worded in the adopted local plan and indeed St James neighbourhood plan, I think this decision does lay open the risk of further decisions, against what the local plan says, for the reasons that we expect. So in some ways, I don't like to use the term, but in some ways it could be viewed as a precedent, this decision. As for your first question, I'm not sure a barrister was involved because, as Chair pointed out, this was a written rep. Sorry, it's Councillor Mitchell pointed out this was a written reps. So under written reps, there's no cross-examination, there's no public debate, and usually it's literally, as it says, it's information that's submitted. So I can't be sure that evidence and that written representative wasn't written by a barrister, but there was certainly no cross-examination. So it's unlikely that it was clever wording or tactics, because that particular appeal process didn't allow for that. But certainly, I think that's why I've specifically landed on this particular appeal. It's just that it does have significance in terms of future decision making, which we have to take on board. So as a general rule, appeal decisions are material considerations alongside, the policies. And in this particular case, it's important. So it's important because it does throw into question, the robustness of the actual policies themselves as well. So it's a kind of double problem for us.
Thank you. Councillor Ross. Press that.
Oh, sorry. Failed at the first hurdle. I haven't really got a question. I'm probably just thinking out loud. Sort of following on from what Councillor Johnson said. If we go down the route of a percentage, are we likely then to fall into an issue of, because we're almost after the fact, if you like, so we've already got a lot of student housing and things, would that percentage apply within a ward, and therefore, if it would up to the border of St James and then it sort of, restarts again over the road, or is it across the city, or is it within a, you know, kind of city block type thing? I think that I can just see that almost giving more options for appeal if we've got a percentage. I don't know, it might not be. Otherwise, the alternative is that it's a massive piece of work to do to nail down what our percentages are at the moment, to come to, you know, a kind of a sensible barometer test almost. That, you know, nailing down that definition might be a better route to kind of consider. I don't know. Like I say, I haven't really got a question. I'm just kind of thinking out loud. But I can see that once you start getting into that, the kind of the statistics of it, that is going to cause problems, because there'll be pockets where that percentage has already gone. So does that then set a precedent? Because actually you say it in the plan, but I don't know. That's me.
Yeah, we're also running into the whole concept of, once you've got statistics, they can be used any way you want. You know, in Wilson Church, statistics are used the same way as a drunk uses a lamppost, more to support the illumination. Councillor Hughes, obviously this is a series of comments on an appeal. Normally we only allow people to speak once, but you're almost welcome to make another contribution if you wish, but please keep it brief.
It was super brief, just in response to Councillor Jobson. My concern, and I just wanted it on record, Director, my concern is creating an us and them rhetoric in terms of our residents, that somehow there is a hierarchy of residency. I'm uncomfortable with that. I would just like to put that out there.
And I just want to ask permission, Chair, to point in favour and unblock my iPad.
Yes, of
In
course.
the
Yes.
interest of decorum, I would like permission to do that.
And Councillor Patrick.
Thank you, Chair. In an effort to, oh gosh, sorry. Thank you. In an effort to not reinvent the wheel, I was just wondering, perhaps if the Director was aware of any other cities that have also, implemented sort of similar language in their neighbourhood plan to sort of protect their community balance. And if not, maybe we could sort of look at some so that we can follow best practice rather than having to work everything out ourselves. Thank you.
Thanks, and I think, yes, the answer to that is yes. I think what I asked my team to do as a result of this appeal decision is look root and branch at the whole basis of the policy direction, really. And what I mean by that is that, first of all, in setting the policy, any plan policy, we're going to look at what are you trying to achieve, what's your objective, and we'll have training on this, no doubt, in a number of different areas, but the same principle applies whichever policy thing. First of all, what is your objective? And then you craft a policy to achieve that objective. So I think the first thing to understand is what is our objective, and I think that kind of speaks to Councillor Hughes' point, really. What are we trying to achieve? And that's something that I'd like my team to firstly re-examine and unpick, and then come up with some considerations. Once we were able to define that, and whatever that objective or series of objectives is, and I'm not going to comment on what I think those objectives should be at the moment. I think that's something that we then, because this is policy making, we're not making policy tonight, but it's really useful to have your comments, which is why I'm wanting the debate. Once we've established what those objectives would be, that's something I think then we need to consider for our executive who make policy. So it's not officers that make policy; it's the executive. And so this is clearly a really important issue for members, in particular wards, but probably also for the whole city. And it's something that that's where we need to consider it. What are our objectives? How does that relate to the whole city, as well as whatever the local impacts are? And it's always, and this is something you'll hear from us a lot as officers, new members of the committee, it's always about the question of what's the balance in a number of factors. So I think that's where I would leave it at the moment. I'm not leading you in the debate, and it's wrong for me to do that. But I think we need to take a step back from the whole wording and decision making of this particular person. What are our objectives? And I'll always go back to basics and revisit those and come up with some options, really, I guess, in relation to this issue of student accommodation. It's a big issue. It cuts across not just local issues, but right across the city. It impacts on economic considerations, support for local businesses. It's an issue for movement and transport, sustainability, so on and so forth, as well as the local issues that are referred to in the neighbourhood plan about concentration and imbalance. There are many other issues at stake. So it's about our objectives. I think the emerging local plan is the right place to have that debate and discussion, and we'd like to involve you in that. So the next version of the local plan is what's called Regulation 19. So it's like up to now we've had draft plans for consultation. The next version will be the version that we would want to then take for examination. So there's an opportunity there to sort of revisit some of those questions for that. And then make sure then, really important point is that whatever the direction of the policies and the objectives that underpin those was, have we got the evidence base then to justify? So that's what we will then be examined on, not so much the merits of the policy and whether it's right or wrong, is whether, because that's for the council to decide. What the inspector will look at is there evidence to substantiate it and say to substantiate that it's deliverable, and that's where we will also look at it from the sort of the other end of the telescope almost, really, that even if we come up with a percentage, or if that's the approach, and I'm not saying it is, but if that was the approach, can that be substantiated? Can that be evidence and then substantiated, and is it deliverable? And so we're going to address all of those issues, but I think it's because it's so important, this, for the city, the whole issue about student accommodation. It cuts across many policy areas, something that is worth revisiting again, and I've asked my team to begin to do that. The next few weeks and months, really, and we'll probably bring something back to you, probably through the planning method working group. I think it's a good place for this to have those discussions initially about the objectives, I think, and then as we move forward on those objectives, how do we represent those objectives in terms of policy and all the sort of issues that underpin that.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Mitchell.
Just one question to the director, which I think is relevant for members as well as my own education on this matter. In the report from the appeal decision, there seemed the inspector clearly delineated between interpretation of policy and supporting text, that he gave lesser weight to supporting text. Now, I as a layperson always assumed the supporting text elaborated, explained, gave a context for the policy, therefore is of equal standing. So if that isn't so, does that mean in future that the actual policy statements we make have to be far more elaborate so that they don't need supporting text if it is of little value when it comes to appeal?
Okay, so you're absolutely right. What's examined through a local plan is the uppercase policy text, and decisions are made on the basis of those policy wording, precise policy wording. The supporting text is also looked at, but it's not examined in the sense of the evidential approach to a local plan examination. The support is also useful in decision making because it does give context and reference. So your point about then if the supporting text doesn't carry the same weight, which it doesn't, do we need to bring some of that supporting text into the policies? There is an issue there in that there's other requirements of policy to make them precise and clear, and sometimes I think less is more. And I think the point was raised earlier about the more you put into something, the more it can be challenged. And so I think it's really important that we get the balance right. I think there is an issue around I'm not leading the debate again here, I'm just thinking out is that there are certain parts of the city that probably this bears more than others. But in the context of that local impact, but then what we've got to balance that against is what are the objectives for the city as a whole? And so there is it isn't a straightforward one. And so a neighbourhood plan, for example, we look at the local area, but a citywide plan has to bring in all of the other factors, economic, etc. And there is a strong economic driver around this issue, no doubt about that, as well as the sort of residential and other issues.
Councillor Bash.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I agree with what everybody else has said, pretty much. But one of the comments here where it says it was noted that over-concentration area of the city and imbalance of the local community are not defined in the policy. And I think one of the problems is imbalance in the local community, because that's an area where there are already quite a high number of students. That could be, I can kind of see how they would say that's not creating an imbalance in the local community, because the balance there is there's already a lot of students compared to another area where there aren't any students, and if you then stuck some in there, that would create an imbalance. You see what I mean? That made more sense for you.
Yeah. I think
The imbalance of local.
what's interesting as well, listening to the all of views that have been expressed is really helpful to us as officers, is that I think what I was trying to say before about objectives, but what are we seeking to address then? Another way of looking at this is what harm are we seeking to address through policy? And that's what I meant by objectives, really. And balance that against the potential benefits. So we tend to often focus on the harm, and in this case into a local area, but what are the benefits of having students in our city? And that's something that we need to weigh up as policy makers as well. And so that's what I meant by this is a citywide issue, and it's the right place to address this is through a citywide local plan, notwithstanding the fact that we have an adopted neighbourhood plan as well in this case, which is absolutely fine as well.
Thank you, Councillor Paul.
Yeah, so just to speak to that question of the local balance and where it impacts and does it impact on particular postcodes. So I'm the member for Lindsay, Macon, Whipton, and we believe we do not have a very high student population in our ward. But I think there's still a perception in the ward of a certain imbalance in the city as a whole. And yeah, so I think that impact, even though it's not actually the building isn't happening in the ward, it is still something that is of interest to the residents. You know, and I think there is an understanding of the economic benefits of the university to the city, but there's also a perception of sort of, you know, blocks that maybe out of character, a changing character of the city, and that is something that people do verbalise quite regularly, well not that regularly in Lindsay, Macon, Whipton, but it is something that does come up in doorstep conversations.
Thank you. Are we satisfied you've made a little contribution there? I think roughly to summarise, we are agreeing with the director. I thank him for allowing this conversation, which has been, I think, most useful. That there is obviously going to be a very serious examination of the consequences of this allowing of the appeal, and we look forward to either tightening our language or loosening it, or whatever it is that is required in order to be able to get
refining it.
I just think one last thing, Chair, is that I think it will take us some while to unpick this and then translate it into policy, etc. So just reinforce that, should that, I don't know whether there are any other similar applications in the pipeline, but if there were, we would be referring to this decision in our sort of, in our reports really. So just clearly we couldn't just ignore that, and we would be referring to that appeal decision in the short term at least, till we've addressed the policy.
Thank you. I need to get back to my agenda. That was item number 7. We then come to the date of the next meeting. When you revert back, sorry, Councillor Hall.
Sorry, I had a question on item 7.
All right, a different one, yeah?
Yeah.
Sorry, I apologize. Carry on.
Yeah, so I just was noting, so I was just noting the new appeals under point 4. And there was an appeal that was of interest to me. And I just wondered what is the, I just wondered where I can find out more information about the original decision that was made and the refusal in order. So is that something I can just contact you at the office about and follow up with? Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you short there, Councillor. Right, so are there any other comments about any of the other appeals? No? Okay, thank you. In that case, yes, we're moving on to our final item. Yes, so we have on the agenda that you are to note these reports, so I would like to call that those have been noted, and in particular the appeals report has been discussed. Date of our next meeting, we're reverting back to Mondays, which I think is probably going to be good for everybody's diaries, but it's June, the 24th of June, and again at 5:30. Thank you all very much indeed for your attention and your attendance, and look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.